Strike while the iron's hot, and this, dang, I can only imagine what they thought when they read it. When they came across it, I can only imagine, like, they, cause it's like, when we go through this issue, like, it's like, I think they probably took for granted how much this is affecting people.
My DC folks at? How many of y'all just got here? How many of y'all been here? Y'all remember this? Play it just a little louder, please, if you don't mind. For those of y'all who don't know, this is go-go music. It's indigenous to the DC community. You hear that percussion? You hear that calm response? Just the way they're talking to their people, their hoods. That's how we talk to our ancestors. It's all parallel to one another. Isn't it beautiful? I want you guys to hear the hoods that they're naming. How many of these hoods are still around? How many of them can you name and still see when you hop on a bus? How many of us can say that we can attend a go-go function at one of the old spots that used to be around in the 80s, 90s, 2000s? Very few of us. So I think it's very appropriate that today we have this very important discussion. A lot of us, I understand it's 420, you know, marijuana is the big craze in DC all of a sudden after people got locked up for it decades before, and people are out and about. They get to eat their brownies, their edibles, do them, and that's fine and dandy. But understand that that too is part, a puzzle. It's a puzzle, a piece of a bigger puzzle that is gentrification and the changing of the tide in DC that has been happening for more than a decade, a couple decades going back at least, where the powers that be wanted to shift the population of DC and its composition so that it matches that of the people on Capitol Hill who make the laws, and if they're away from, they often hype up the negative aspects, forgetting to mention that it was part of a bigger government conspiracy to take down all of the chocolate cities. And now, as we looked at the first black president in that era, we saw DC slipping away from our hands. The same time, Trump's people in the Appalachian Mountains and the backwoods of the United States were holding up their Klan rallies and tossing up their Confederate flags. Their liberal counterparts were white in Washington, D.C., and getting us in trouble for the culture that we had. No longer could we sit on our porches. No longer could we play music at our festivals. No longer could we do what black Washingtonians do. And I'm against that. And that is the very, very goal of the All Eyes on DC Grassroots News Movement. So shouts out to y'all on Facebook, but especially shouts out to y'all in Sankofa Video Books and Cafe. Whether you came upon this event by accident, you saw it on Eventbrite, you saw it on Facebook, whether you're a friend of mine, a kin, it doesn't matter. I appreciate you being here because you've shown a commitment to change and you've shown a commitment to making sure that we understand what it takes to make DC ours again. Because it will happen. Everything is very cyclical. But the question is, where are you going to be when it's happened? What part are you going to play in it happening? Hopefully you answer that tonight. If not, please take it home, right? While you guys are enjoying this interview, I highly encourage you to patronize the cafe in the back, Brother Tensai, and his comrades in the back. They make very, very good food. Very, very good tea. Appropriate. And it's funny how the stars sort of line up. It just so happens that this week, Brother Ari has come forward with some legal judiciary. He's played his role as a lawyer for the people in Washington, D.C., and he has brought a case to the powers that be. We're talking about going back a couple administrations, as well as people in government offices. All right, the alleged crime, right? Are you guys ready for this? Please tell me you're ready for this. The alleged crime, come on. The purposeful manipulation of zoning laws in order to favor gentrifiers, well, I'm going to let him talk more about it, to favor the DC creative community and other people over that of native Washingtonians who have been here for generations. That is the alleged crime, as stated in the document that he sent to the powers that be this week. That, ladies and gentlemen, is using your craft for the greater good.
Is really about how the city has manipulated zoning laws, common law, and other kinds of precedents to create a city that is a, quote, world-class city. And this was something that they decided to do in 2006, was to make DC a world-class city. And the way that they decided to do this was following the guidelines or the strategy of an urban planner named Richard Florida. And it used to be when people developed cities that they made the cities based on a building, like the Empire State Building. If you build an Empire State Building, people will come to your city to see the Empire State Building, or people will come to your city because you have a nice stadium. Well, in 2006, DC and several other cities decided that these large civic projects that cost millions of dollars weren't the best ways to draw people and to have a vibrant city. Vibrant is a word I know you guys have heard if you pay any attention to like the development in the city. And so what they discovered was, instead of building these big projects, was that if you are able to bring cool people into your city or interesting people into your city, then they would attract other interesting people or cool people, and they would make money for the city and grow the city's economy through their collaboration and innovation. And this class of individuals called the creative class. Most of them are millennials. They don't have families. It skews white. It skews highly educated. And the city decided back in 2006 to issue some policy called the Creative Action Agenda. And it's a policy document where they go into detail about what can they do to manipulate land use laws to draw this highly valued citizen who would come with a degree, who would come with interesting tastes and art and music and all these things to make your city a vibrant place. And so they went about doing this. And there are protections that citizens have in DC. We have a robust human rights law. You're not allowed to discriminate based on source of income. And so a preference for the creative class is explicit discrimination based on source of income, because your income has to be based on the way that they define the creative class is innovative processes. So if you cut hair, that's not an innovative process. If you are a babysitter, that's not an innovative process. And so in cities all over the country, wherever they've done this, they've discovered that when there are large black populations or large populations without degrees, that these policies to draw the creative class create inequality, because all of the fat that the government produces is going towards that group to draw them. And how it violates the Fair Housing Act is this policy that they have to build high-density developments by metro everywhere, but then make them all one bedroom and make them market rate, and then give grants to certain businesses over others and deny grants to other businesses based on the business's ability to draw this wanted population, which is supposed to increase the tax base. Now, DC has done this, and at the same time that they've done this, of course, there's been opposition. DC, like, we're not the kind of people, I'm a fourth generation resident, we're not the kind of people to just sit back and allow these sorts of things to happen. And so at Berry Farm, they fought back. Pretty much everywhere where they tried to do these types of developments, they fought back. And the place that you fight back is at the Zoning Commission. And the Zoning Commission has colluded with the Office of Planning. What they've done is they've ignored every single community concern that's gone before the Zoning Commission. They haven't turned down a PUD. A PUD is a planned unit development. And so you're allowed to build, when you develop, you're allowed to build what the current zoning is. But if you want to build more for it, like this is a row house, say you wanted to build something 10 stories right here, you'd have to go to zoning and get your PUD approved. And they're supposed to weigh the adverse impacts of these PUDs, but they never do. They're supposed to get studies from the Department of Housing and Community Development, but they never do. And so this has been a pattern and practice that's gone on to facilitate the needed density and the needed apartment spaces for this vaunted individual, this class of people to come in. And beyond that, there's studies to tell you what draws the creative class, but then there's also studies that say what the creative class doesn't like. And you can imagine what they don't like. They don't like tight-knit communities. And the reason why they don't like them is because these people are coming from everywhere. The creative class, they're not produced here necessarily. They're coming from all over the country. They're drawing them from all over the world. And so these people want to be able to move into a community and, quote, plug and play. You know, they want to plug in their laptop at a shared workspace, sit down next to someone else who got here a week ago, and everybody's best friends in a month. And so DC becomes a staging ground for these types of people. Meanwhile, the long-term residents, the people in tight-knit communities who kind of repel the creative class, because if the creative class were to come to these communities, they're not going to be as accepted. People are going to wonder who the hell they are. And they're not going to have the mandate to create, you know. And so the creative class is really this loose group. But if you can work, I would say if you can work in a Starbucks all day on your laptop, you're probably a member of the creative class. And so I'm technically in the creative class, even though I'm not among the group that they would be trying to draw, because I live in a tight-knit community in Anacostia, and I'm fourth generation, and so I have different values than the sorts of creative class people that they want to bring into the city. But that's what the lawsuit's about. It's about how they've assigned resources in ways that implicate race, gender, age, source of income, and even religion.
Wow, thank you for that breakdown. So, to me, what it sounds like economics, correct me if I'm wrong, it might be the factor here, right? Or it might be a factor in terms that pretty much DC wants to increase tax revenue, and it wants to, well, like you said, make it a vibrant city. One point I wanted to touch on, and you spoke about this, just people fighting back, right? How feasible is it for people to fight back, you know, given the fact that the DC Zoning Commission, at least 3 people on the Zoning Commission are appointed by the mayor, and like you said, there's colluding in that regard, and even the DC Council, when it comes time for testimonies related to the DC Comprehensive Plan, or just other things related to zoning, right? the DC council members being, you know, recipients of funding from developers, how feasible is it for a grassroots movement to take place where residents are fighting back? How successful can that be given all that they're up against? Is there something that I'm missing?
Well, I think it can be very successful because at the zoning commission, you're probably not going to win because, like you said, they're appointed by the mayor. There are 2 others that are appointed federally, and when you go before them, those are pretty much sham proceedings. But you go there and you fight back and you get everything on the record so you can file an appeal later on at the Court of Appeals. And those have been successful simply because just by merely filing an appeal, this can delay a project for over a year. And so we've been able to use that to leverage things that have been useful to communities. Money, jobs packages, the sort of CBAs that would typically come if the zoning commission were any kind of barrier where a negotiation could take place there. But since the zoning commission is not that, you have to go there and exhaust your remedy there and then seek counsel later and go to the appeals court or do a pro se. But I would say that, yeah, it's very feasible to fight back, that this lawsuit right here is evidence of that because a lot of the zoning appeals made their way into here. Yeah, so you can fight back. I mean, how successful you are at the zoning commission, I would say probably not very successful right now. But I believe this lawsuit could change some things, and I believe that yeah, it's always worthwhile to go and get your voice on the record.
So as far as, once again, thank you for that. You went into detail about this a little bit, about developers skirting around, you know, zoning laws. Which methods are the most prominent? Like you said, given that DC is becoming more dense, I know you mentioned, you know, them adding levels to their houses, but which law other than that is most prominent in breaking up communities that used to be like all black at one point, majority black at least?
Well, I would say that new communities, which is a DCHA program, and so when they made their announcement in 2006 to make DC a world-class city, the person who made that announcement was Neil Albert. And Neil Albert at the time was the deputy mayor for economic and planning and development for Mayor Fenty. Right now, he's the board of directors for DC Housing Authority. And he's overseen votes to deny Berry Farm residents development in place, which would be a form of development where they get to stay in the neighborhood or on the site while they redevelop it. And so he's overseen votes to make it so that doesn't happen. And I can imagine why, as someone being the original architect of this world-class city where they have vowed to, you know, bring in the creative class, and it's because those communities are the anti-creative class in many ways. And so I would say that new communities is it, or even Hope 6. These things, this happened in Navy Yard. The census tract at Navy Yard in 2006, it had 600 people living there. 480 of them were black and about 120 of them were white. In 2016, there were almost 4,000 white residents and 1,200 black residents. So the statistics flipped, but it's not the same black people there. It's different black people. You look at their levels of education, you know, all those people didn't get degrees in 10 years. Those people are gone. They were removed from their communities and put somewhere else. When you look in places, and it's not even the suburbs. When you look at the exurbs, like Centerville, Virginia, or Germantown, Maryland, you see increases of poverty of 90% over the same time period.
Is that because people from DC are getting pushed out there?
I believe so. I believe that's what's happening.
I heard stuff about that, people going as far as Woodbridge at one point.
Yes, that's one of the areas that has seen a growth in poverty rates.
So what does that mean as far as just, you know, I'm thinking about stuff like spatial mismatching, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's when, I guess, the amenities or the absence of, there's just not a match between, I guess, what's needed and just where people are at that certain point. What does that mean for these major cities? Are black people, going to live in any major city, like, just ever again, or just for the time being?
Well, I mean, that's what this lawsuit is for me, is a line in the sand and making them answer some things, answer some questions about how they're fundamentally operating. And like I said, it implicates religion, it implicates all kinds of things. Some of these things are very race neutral. And it's about people's fundamental rights and whether or not they have the ability to influence their communities. It doesn't matter what color you are. But this particularly impacts black people because these are policies as it exists in the DC government to break apart long-standing black communities and maybe even replace them with more black people, but they're black people with no roots and no ties, and who aren't going to create black political power, who aren't going to create black culture. So it's very different things that are happening here.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that. I often think about Ward 8 being the last frontier in all of this. From your vantage point, what is the status of the current fight down there as far as just, maintaining a tight-knit community? And, what is it from what you've seen so far? I know MLK is on its way, as well as, some other parts. I know they have a government building down there by, I believe it's Anacostia Station.
Yeah.
So, what's the current fight looking like down there? And from what you can see, what are the plans for the future makeup of Southeast DC? Of course, from what I can assume, black people have no involvement in it if the powers that be get their way. But what does the Southeast that they want look like, from what you can understand?
Okay, well, the Southeast that they want, well, first I want to address, I thought it was a good point where you were talking about, what's the fight looking like right now? And it's tough because they hit you on two ends, right? And so you have the policy things that they're hitting you with to kind of force you out actively, but then there's stuff that they do that's kind of passive to put you out. And so a lot of people, like in Berry Farm, for example, a lot of people want to leave Berry Farm because they don't keep up the units. The landlords don't keep up the units. Landlords don't keep up the units a lot of places. And so you're actively fighting, you're fighting to survive, you're fighting these policies, but then you also gotta fight, no heat in the winter, and a mold in the cabinets. And so that's the sort of thing that makes people wanna leave, but do they really wanna leave? Or, is it just, just the forces pushing them out?
That's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like manipulation. If we had the basic amenities, of course they would feel more inclined to fight. But oftentimes I think that's definitely a strategy I've heard being used all around the city. If you go uptown right now, I believe it's 2nd and Ingraham. Well, not even that. There's some other spots around there, but just in that area, they have been letting apartments go to waste just so that they can get flipped.
Absolutely.
So as far as that fight, what does it look like for other Washingtonians right now? Because from what I've been reading, in the last few years, those transplants that you talk about, of course people, they have their plans, but they also have the different outcomes, right? So these transplants, instead of moving out of the city like, planners had hoped, many of them want to keep roots up here, right?
Right.
So how does that change the game, with, the more educated, transplant elite of DC wanting to set roots here and create families? How does that play into the possibility of the tide changing and maybe, developers and just other parties thinking about, well, maybe we need to slow down on making this such a transient city, making it a place where people can party, and maybe think about more of a hybrid model. What part does that play? What part does that play in?
I hope it plays a large role. I haven't seen too much. I mean, living where I live, and I mean, where I live, it's family. It's already family there. There's a lot of kids in Ward 8. and Ward 7. They don't care nothing about them, but they're there. And you know, the rest of the city, they may start having some you know, children more often, and you know, that's probably why they're redoing a lot of the schools and a lot of the infrastructure and stuff like that.
But I reckon that's not even for us though. That's just my concern, you know, because I take Baloo, for example, right across the street. They got new houses over there. A lot of properties being built around these DC schools. So, you know, it's the question always comes to me, you know, about who exactly are they building it for? And, you know, just speaking of which, how does this affect black businesses? You know, I often think about Shaw. I can count on my finger. Well, not even on, you know, just thinking about 7th Street in general. You know, not a lot of places that used to be there before gentrification happened. How does this affect black businesses?
Well, a lot of black businesses are going under, I think. The price of being around is very high. And then they're at a competitive disadvantage because they're not the preferred kind of business, and so they're not receiving the grants, they're not receiving the assistance from government in terms of licensing and getting space in the new developments and things like that.
Speaking of preferred businesses, for the creative class and just the people that they're trying to attract, what are some of the amenities that they're looking for? What makes the city that would be one that would attract creatives from what you're saying?
Well, one example, they like shared workspace, so they have a lot of that, like a lot of cafes. It's like some cafes that are like cafes and then during the day and then sell alcohol at night. Just kind of flexible spaces for, you know, people that don't really have set schedules and stuff like that. I mean, I could think of the areas of the city. Union Market is a space where they're really trying to, I don't know if anyone's been over to that area over there. But like the typical space, you know, I would say that this qualifies as a creative space, even though I don't know how, you know, how much it, you know, that's like what they desire, because I know this has been around for a very long time and it's a part of the community. But yeah, like the kind of spaces where, you know, you do more than one thing. You know, if it's a restaurant, that's not creative, but if it's a restaurant sells books, that's creative. That's a creative space. So, you know, multi-use spaces.
So, what say you about the argument that, you know, and this has been made oftentimes, why can't black people just get with the program? Why can't black Washingtonians be a part of the creative class? Why can't they take advantage of the opportunities? What say you about that? Even going back to all the hoopla surrounding, you know, the protests, you know, about Starbucks and all of that. There's often there's pushback, you know, from people who have been disappointed and just disillusioned with the DC of the 80s and 90s, you know, who say that, you know, we should participate in this new world, this new Washington, DC. Is that possible? You know, you make it, you know, you say that it can't, of course, but how can Ward 8 residents specifically, and just residents in other majority black parts of the city, what can they do? And you know, you've alluded to this already, beyond, you know, what they're doing right now to make it so that they maintain their communities while getting these amenities, or is it just impossible?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know whether it's impossible or possible. I believe it's possible. I think that there has to be earnest effort on behalf of the government, and I don't think that's there. Yeah, I think it's possible.
So, let's give Ari a hand, y'all. Let's give him a hand, y'all. So, Brother Ari brought a lot of science here tonight, and I think this is a good segue to, you know, just talking about elections, pretty much. How does this, what are the issues on the table as far as, you know, just zoning and housing policy is concerned in DC for 2018? You know, people are going to talk about the comprehensive plan, of course, but what comes out of that? You know, how does that spiral into just other areas of living?
I just want to give the audience a sense of how deep the zoning issue runs, and how it pretty much affects other facets of living in DC.
Well, the comprehensive plan is basically a plan that talks about the ideals of a neighborhood. It happens on 3 levels. There's a very local plan that's a part of the comprehensive plan, so like street level, so maybe from like this block to like a few blocks up, and that would be like the small area plan, and they talk about what they want here. You know, I'm looking out and I see like low-lying row homes. It's probably moderate density, you know, some commercial space, and so that's probably, you know, this area. But then you go down somewhere else a little bit further, and like the density may be higher. And these are guides for like what developers can come and do by right. So when I say by right, it means a developer can come and like do something in an area just because they bought the property. They don't need any further permission. But if you need further permission, then you have to go to the zoning commission. And the comprehensive plan is all of the considerations that the zoning commission should take into account when they make their decision about whether or not to give you the extra density that you request, or the extra floor levels that you request. And the comprehensive plan is a 20-year document, which is being amended right now. And it's going through council right now. And part of the push that's happening is because of everything that's happening at the zoning commission. There's been so many appeals. I've been a part of 14 of them. So I brought probably the most of them. But it's because there's stuff wrong with all of the zoning decisions. And so they're trying to change the comprehensive plan to make it so it's harder to file appeals, so projects can't be delayed. And so the way that they're doing that is by making the laws in it like more vague. So like the comprehensive plan may say something like right now, it may say something like on Georgia Avenue, you know, between this block and that block, you can only have 3-story buildings. Well, they're trying to change the comprehensive plan to say stuff like, well, the maps are meant to be fuzzy. You know, you can't make a line at Georgia Avenue. The maps are soft-edged. So that means that they could put something here, yeah.
So in that case, it sounds like they want to fill up these places more, or accommodate more people that are coming into the city?
Right, they want to accommodate more people. I mean, that's the thing, that they want more density everywhere. And I don't have a problem with density one way or the other. It's it's the density of. You know, if you're building density luxury housing, density 1-bedrooms, density studios, and you're clustering them all by metro, which means that no families live by metro, which means that, you know, certain age brackets don't live by metro, then like you're creating a situation that's going to lead to the sorts of scenarios that we're seeing playing out with gentrification, displacement.
So it sounds like there are like a lot of pockets in DC where families have nothing, pretty much.
Absolutely, absolutely. Families are pretty much left out of the cold, left out in the cold. I've been a part of 8 appeals in the Union Market area. They've been trying to develop that area with high density housing, about 6,000 units, and only 10 of them are for people with more than 2 bedrooms out of the 6,000 units. And like, yeah.
Was that the basis for most of your appeals?
Family units?
The fact that it's not accommodating low income
or
reasonable income?
A lot of the reasoning for my appeals is procedural, because the push to bring in the creative class has been so much that they just ignore the laws. The push to create density has been so much that, like, when I represented Berry Farm before the zoning commission, I had residents from Berry Farm who lived there. They were denied party status. And party status is a status where you go to the zoning commission and you apply for it, you say, I'm uniquely affected by this project, so I would like to bring witnesses and cross-examine the people who are applying for this project. And they were denied that, even though they lived there. And so the zoning commissioner, Anthony Hood, I managed to get him questioned by Mendelson at his reappointment. And so Mendelson, the chair of the council, asked Hood, he said, well, why did you deny Berry Farm party status? I'm hearing this thing about party status, that you guys don't do party status right. And he said that a lot of people had issues with Berry Farm being torn down, so I had trouble with the uniquely affected part. They're uniquely affected because they live there.
That sounds like
you know, so exactly, like it was ridiculous. And so these are the sorts of things that you encounter when you go to the zoning commission, and those are all points to bring up on appeal. And the appeals court looks at it with fresh eyes, because we operate under a system of precedence. So even if they hate the people at Berry Farm, they can't say blue is pink, because that's going to screw everybody. So, yeah.
So you mentioned Mendelson, and you mentioned the zoning commission. Talk to me more about, let's go back to your testimony on March 20th. If you don't mind talking a little bit about that, what knowledge you had to, I guess, divulge, or what questions you had for the DC Council. How many hours was it? It was like a good half a day, almost?
It was 13 hours.
13 hours.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, March 20th, DC residents and other parties, they testified at the DC Council about the DC Comprehensive Plan. Ari, I guess, was a part of that, and he stayed until the wee hours of the next morning, I'm hearing, right?
Yeah, I testified around 1 a.m. and it ended at 3, but it started at 2 p.m. and went till 3 a.m. And it was the largest witness list that they've had since, it's the largest one that DC has ever had.
And that's very telling, considering, the gravity, of these zoning laws. The theme is, let me hear it, I wrote it down here. The goal, according to the DC Zoning Commission, is to plan for an inclusive city. So if they say on their website that they want to plan for an inclusive city, and you're telling me this, all this information about creatives having the leeway to take over, it just doesn't sound congruent to me. So it makes sense that this was the largest or the longest hearing ever in DC Council history. What specifically did you talk about when you when it was your turn to speak?
Well, a lot I mentioned with you guys, and when you go before the zoning commission and you're an applicant, you're asking for all of this extra density, you're asking for the ability to develop what you're allowed to do by right, beyond what you're allowed to do by right. Your attorney actually writes the order that the zoning commission is supposed to look over and I guess change a little bit and then issue. So your own attorney is an applicant. They call them a findings of fact and conclusions of law. So they're supposed to do that. What I believe has happened, I think that the attorneys for the opposing side have managed to convince developers and their lobbyists that the issue with all of these appeals is that it's the comprehensive plan, and the comprehensive plan needs to be more vague, and there won't be any more appeals. When really it's just they're getting beat by some pro se parties and a solo attorney who lives in Anacostia. That's really what's happening. It's not the comprehensive plan. As I stated, a lot of the reasons why this stuff is happening is because they're just not following the rules. They're not doing adverse impact assessments. They're not doing party status correctly. They're not giving ANCs their great weight. And so this is some of what I spoke about to council was you guys are here trying to change the comprehensive plan. That's just gonna make the starting point for injustice further out than it is right now. What you guys need to do is make it so the zoning commission isn't so corrupt. And that has nothing to do with the comprehensive plan. It's like throwing out your engine when you need an oil change.
Wow. Would you mind taking us back, you dropped quite a bit of knowledge right there about the process that they should follow when involving density. You mentioned 2 steps, and before mentioning the ANC input. Would you mind going over those first 2 steps?
Okay, well, the first step that's supposed to happen that never happens is the Department of Housing and Community Development, by statute, is supposed to produce a report. About the adverse impacts of proposed planned unit developments or proposed increases in density. And adverse impacts are stuff like increases, destabilization of land values. All this stuff is written into the statutes, the enabling statute of the Zoning Commission, which is supposed to protect for the stability of neighborhoods, which is supposed to protect for people's general welfare, and that sort of thing. And so they're supposed to produce a report. That doesn't happen. They're just making these findings that, oh, there's not going to be gentrification because no one's home is torn down. They said that over at McMillan Park. Well, they said at McMillan Park, actually, after they got sent back, because we won that case, they got sent back, and they said DHCD has to do a report. So DHCD hired some consultants, and they said that, oh, there's not going to be any gentrification because gentrification's already taken over the city. So, there's no point, and there's nothing that we can do here. And so that's the first thing that's supposed to happen. But then as far as the ANC great weight is concerned, when your ANC represents people. They were elected in the office. So these are like your democratic representatives. And so when they go to the Zoning Commission, they're not just giving their opinion. They're not even giving an expert opinion. They're giving the opinion of the community. And so the Zoning Commission is supposed to give that great weight and give that great weight in its considerations, which they don't do. Their findings on that is just as bizarre as with anything else. For example, with Berry Farm, the ANC, and that's another thing, like some ANCs are shady. Like they'll hold votes when there's no quorum.
I was just about to talk to you about that.
And they'll do stuff like that. And so in Berry Farm, there was a vote, and the ANC was together. They was like, we don't want this development unless you reduce the density of it, and unless you protect the people from displacement. Now the Zoning Commission, the Zoning Commission decided that displacement wasn't in their purview, even though it clearly was by statute. There's a statute that says the Berry Farm developer shall take steps to avoid dislocation. So that was in there. They said, the Zoning Commission said, oh, that's outside our purview. But since they said that it was outside their purview, they didn't give that ANC great weight. They said, all the things that you guys wanted, we can't consider anyway. So we're going to give this ANC vote that did not have quorum and actually okayed the development, we're going to give that great weight. And so just kooky stuff like that is what goes on. They're supposed to give great weight, but they don't. And it's across the board, the sorts of things that they're doing at the Zoning Commission.
So what it sounds like to me on the ANC side is that that's a sign of just how the ANC is getting more reflective of gentrified communities. Because I even see the same stuff uptown sometimes where ANCs are turning, the demographics of the ANC are turning, with less black people, quite honestly.
I believe that, and that's part of the strategy. And my community in Ward 8 is still very black. And the strategy there is divide and conquer, of course, pay somebody something, stuff like that. Very divide and conquer strategy.
So as far as, focusing on the Zoning Commission and just the fact that Mayor Bowser is appointing them, by virtue of that, I guess, me putting my thinking cap on, I guess shaking up the Zoning Commission would involve virtually, I guess, getting a new mayor. I'm not sure how possible that is, given the fact that Mayor Bowser is backed by a lot of developers, she has a whole lot of money. But, what's your take on the whole, I guess, political landscape with this, the election coming up and all? What's your take on that? Is there anybody that could see Muriel, or pretty left, left out of field question, but I just wanted to focus on the source, or just one of the sources of this.
No, I don't think anyone can take Muriel, but she's not impervious to criticism. I think that eventually it'll come back on her if she doesn't do the people right.
So, with that being said, what is it that, looking at the DC Council, what part do they play in zoning? I don't think we've gone into that, just beyond the hearings and all of that, but what part would they play in zoning policy as far as just, shaping our ability to revisit it or to just, tweak it?
Well, the DC Council approves the comprehensive plan. And so all those provisions in the comprehensive plan have the force of a legal statute. And also the council would approve stuff like what happened in Buzzard Point, where the DC government had spent millions of dollars to get site control of Buzzard so they, I guess the stadium at Buzzard Point required ownership over 3 different lots that were owned by different people. And so council approved the purchase of that before it even went to the zoning commission. So how fair of a zoning hearing are you going to have at Buzzard Point, where you're complaining about things like pollutants and contaminants in the soil, heavy metals from the concrete factory there, when the DC government's already spent $20 million to own it?
Wow. I'm trying not to be pessimistic here. I'm really not. But it sounds like this is quite a labyrinth here. I got one more question for you, and we're going to open it up to the audience for Ari here. So, I'm not a lawyer by any means. At this point, now that you filed the lawsuit, what's the next step? Or what are the series of steps that go as far as just moving it along?
Well, right now I'm seeking more parties. I'm seeking more people who've been impacted by displacement, threatened displacement, been injured by neglect of their public housing unit.
Who can jump on the case? You said, just people who have been displaced, or what does that look like? Or am I?
No, just anybody who's who feels like they've been discriminated against if they own a business. I know people who owned businesses in Union Market and actually were put out of their business so these new developments could take place. So stuff like that. If you feel like you were denied a grant and you own a business, then you would be implicated in the lawsuit. Probably if you're black in this city, you're implicated in some sort of way.
One last very, very important question. I really have to stress this. Please stress, what is the precedence of something like this being done in the city?
There is no precedence. To my knowledge, this is the first gentrification disinvestment lawsuit. But there have been plenty of pattern and practice claims. And that's the basis of this, is that it's a pattern and practice claims. And so there's a lot of precedence for that. Whenever a commission goes rogue and there are decisions and stuff that just doesn't make sense, that doesn't hold up to scrutiny, there's a lot of precedence for that, but the legal theory that I attach to it is novel.
So break that down for me. Pattern and practice, if I'm hearing this right, that means just like, I guess, stuff they do over and over again. That's pretty much okay. And when you say novel, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, it's new. Like, I don't think anyone's brought this creative class argument before.
I'm really looking forward to seeing how that plays out. I got a feeling that this will pretty much have a really good impact, in the sense that it's looking at the problem holistically. Like, we've talked about it in our circles, just about how DC has been changing, I guess, culturally,
Yeah.
but I've never heard about the issue framed as, you know, the creative class, you know, versus that of like families or just tight-knit communities. You
Yeah.
always hear about gentrification in the sense that, okay, stuff's changing and businesses are closing, but the way you present it, you're really talking about the fabric of DC, like
Yeah.
really changing.
Mhm.
Because families are the foundation of DC,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So the floor is open, you know, for questions, comments, you know, all are appreciated. Once again, I want to thank you guys for coming out to the All Eyes on DC show. I especially want to thank Brother Ari Theresa Esquire here for taking his time out to explain zoning policy to us. This has been a pretty packed show so far, but hopefully we can get some questions from the audience. Go ahead, Alexis.
Hello, I'm Alexis.
Hi.
I go to Howard and I organize with the group there. And we went before the zoning commission because Howard's doing a lot of the same stuff that the city's doing with its properties. And essentially they did what you were talking about.
Wow.
They did postpone the vote after we kind of testified, and they required that we meet with the Howard development team, but then they reconvened like 2 days later without us and made the vote anyway to like
Right.
approve their zoning proposal. So my question is, how do Howard students specifically, how can we use our resources, or what can we do to kind of fight the gentrification that our institution is perpetuating?
Well, I can speak about the work that I'm doing and how the sorts of assistance that I need. You know, I need organizing help. I need minds to look at like the complaint and the stuff that's filed to bounce ideas off of. You know, I need, you know, if anyone has access to a printer, I have to print out 2,000-page appendixes. So, that sort of thing. All right.
Great question.
Has your case been assigned to a judge yet?
Yeah, Emmett Sullivan.
Oh, federal court, huh?
Yeah, U.S. District Court. He's a native. He went to McKinley.
That should have some impact. Well,
I hope so.
for real. Any other audience questions?
That's a huge lift you all have on your shoulders. What kind of backup do you have? Do you have any support through an organization of the Civil Rights Lawyers Association, National Bar?
Well, I'll say that a lot of organizations, you know, when you're grassroots and you're coming up in a place like Anacostia and you're truly rooted, and you know you can get an ANC to be a part of your claim, and you can get, you know, other people from the community and voiceless members of the community to join on. You're a threat to a lot of associations and a lot of organizations, and so you know, they've been more of an obstacle than anything for me. But I do have backup. I do have help, and it's the people. You know, the same reason why I'm a threat is the same reason why I have assistance. You know, like the sister just came and asked how she can help. Like, I get that, and I appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, how are you a threat, exactly?
Well, man, I could do like another show. But, like for instance, I started at Berry Farm. And so I represented, let me just speak generally. Let me speak in general terms. A lot of vested nonprofits have interests that go beyond their clients. They have political interests and they have donor interests. Stoop Law is what I represent. I only represent my clients. I'm not trying to get anybody's money. I'm not trying to get anybody's vote on any issue that I like. You know, I only represent the people. And so when you have those issues, a lot of times the people don't get represented. And you don't want the people to get represented. You don't want them to get transformative help. You like them in the position that they're in, because a lot of your funding is tied to that. A lot of times, you know, a lot of legal actions I see sometimes are more just to raise money than they are to really challenge the system. Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to commend your efforts. I'm awarded. Used to be a resident.
Cool.
His family was like gradually displaced, so
Okay.
it's appreciated. And if any help
Okay.
needed, like,
Thank you.
no problem.
Thank you. I'm gonna talk to you afterwards.
Thank you.
Wow, that's crazy how it connects. Let's give Brother Ari a hand, y'all.
Thank
Come
you.
on, y'all. Let's give Ari a hand, y'all. Question for you. How can the audience get in touch with you? Anybody who has been displaced who wants to add their name and their story to your lawsuit, how can they get in touch with you?
My number is 202-651-1148. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not on Instagram or Twitter. And I wish I had some cards on me, but I left them at home.
If you guys are interested in talking to Ari, I'm not too sure how long he's going to be around after, but you know, we got a little bit of time. But as always, you know, this is Ari's second time on the show. Actually, the first time he was here was Howard Homecoming Weekend. We held it down. We talked about just housing policy and gentrification more generally. But today we really got into the thick of things. You know, into his wheelhouse pretty much. You know, zoning policy, and I'm very, very thankful for that. Before we wrap up, the floor is open for any announcements related to things that are going on in the community, things that we should know about. I know the men's conference is this weekend. They have a march to the White House. They also have some workshops. So, you know, black men and black women, you know, be sure to attend that. All Eyes on DC. Next month we have something very, very special planned for you, but it will not be on the third Friday. We're working out the details for something that's going to be very special, related to pretty much the state of affairs between our brothers and our sisters. This is going to be a good one, all right? This is going to be a good one because right now, you know, they all work together. You know, zoning laws and just black male-female relationships, they all work together. You know, we want to keep families, right? We want to, you know, keep stuff going, but we just can't get it right, you know, anywhere. But we're going to get it right next month, and we got it right tonight. So, you know, I really, really, really want to thank y'all for supporting the movement. I thought there was a sign-in sheet circulating around here. Is it on that counter by any chance? Thank you. Would you mind just, please, if this is your first time attending, if you think I don't have your contact, please sign that list. And also, you know, my social media users, we got the All Eyes on DC hashtag. Wherever you are, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, if you can just use it, tell the people that you were here tonight. Once again, please sign the listserv list, you know, so I can keep you up to date about what's happening. And I myself got one last announcement before we wrap up. We have a writing workshop this summer, you know, 6 weeks. At minimum, 10 students between middle school and high school. We come out to you, reach out to AllEyesOnDC.com for more information. I got a page as well, Sam P.K. Collins. You know, I'm free after this show to talk more about it, but we're looking for at least 10 kids per session for the summertime. 6 weeks, writing about your story. What conflict did you face as a young person, and how did it change your character? All right? My fault, brother. If you have anything else to say, forgive me, because this is about you tonight. This is your show. Anything to just wrap up that we should leave on our minds as we walk out of here, you're more than welcome to say. The floor is yours, sir.
Just that, you know, thanks for coming out. Thanks for listening. I know it's a lot of, you know, jargon and stuff like that. Zoning law is not the most interesting thing. But yeah, thank you. And, you know, go be heard, because that's how it all begins, is just getting your voice on a record somewhere. So, you know, somebody can look at it later. You know, even if it seems like there's no point, just getting your voice on the record so someone can look at it later and do something with it.
Wise words to live by. Ari Theresa, Esquire of Stoop Law. Let's give him a hand, y'all, please. Come on, y'all. All eyes on DC. Yeah. Thank you.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Thanks so much.
All right, y'all. This is the All Eyes on DC show. As always, it's a pleasure having y'all. Peace and blessings.